Okay, great. Hi, Elaine.
Elaine, nice to meet you. I'm Zan.
Nice to meet you. Well, welcome to SOM Consulting.
Thank you very much.
We're really excited to have you here today, and we're just going to dive right in.
That sounds great.
Wonderful. So, your client is Playworks, an American manufacturer of game and sports surfaces. They produce and sell a variety of surfaces, including hardwood, vinyl, and rubber. Their primary customers are schools and park systems. Although they've never produced or sold it themselves, Playworks has observed the popularity of AstroTurf as a sports surface and is considering beginning to offer AstroTurf as part of their product mix. So they've come to us to decide whether or not to enter the AstroTurf market.
Okay. So it sounds like we're representing Playworks, who makes a number of game and sport services for, sounds like, did you say schools and parks?
Yes, schools and park systems.
All right, got it. And so this would be like kind of like the rubber surfaces that might be in the park for kids or something,
Exactly.
or all right, maybe even a basketball court or something like
Exactly.
that. All right, great. Makes a ton of sense, and that AstroTurf seems like it fits pretty nicely with that category or industry. Yeah, so I guess maybe just a couple points of clarification so that I can best advise them on how to go about deciding. So one question would be, do they operate only? I think you said American company, but do they operate only in the U.S. at this point, or?
Good question. Yeah, so it's only in the U.S. and they're only interested in the U.S.
Oh, great. All right, so that definitely helps make things a little bit clearer. All right, so we're looking at U.S. And just thinking about their goals here. So you said they're looking to potentially enter the AstroTurf market. Seems like that fits pretty nicely with their portfolio already. Are they looking at in terms of just like their objective? Are they looking at just kind of simply profitability, or looking at kind of a larger maybe in just like market share thing? So profitability, you're
Just
saying?
right now, yeah.
All right, profitability, great. So I think the question seems pretty clear. If you don't mind, I'd love to just take a couple seconds to sketch out some thoughts on how I'd actually go about attacking this.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thanks. Great. So I can jump into this. So yeah, this seems like a great, interesting question for Playworks. Big basketball player myself, so know a little bit about, I guess, the industry. So just kind of based on my initial instinct, and they came to us with the question of should Playworks ultimately look into entering the AstroTurf market. My initial instinct is that seems like a good idea, and the reason I'm saying that is because it seems like it fits very nicely with their current product portfolio of a number of game and sports services. It's exactly what AstroTurf is. And just kind of anecdotally, I know that things like soccer, professional soccer, and are on the rise, and so there's going to be increasing demand. Would be my instinct for those products. So that's my initial instinct. But I built a framework here that's going to help us prove or disprove that thesis. So the categories of things that I wanted to consider were first and foremost the AstroTurf market. I'm not sure how profitable that is, so I want to dive into that. Want to look at Playworks itself and see if this actually is a nice fit for the unique dynamics of the firm. I think we also need to think about just the ability to finance this. Is there money? And then finally, how do we actually want to go about it? So to dive into those quickly, for the AstroTurf market, I definitely want to know a lot about margins. So I'd want to look a little bit into what are the fixed and variable costs associated with entering a new market like AstroTurf, and ultimately, is this something that's profitable, or is it something that a lot of these firms are offering as a way to just build relationships with customers and they can cross-sell other products that might be more profitable? So if it's that, then obviously this would not be such a great industry to look into. Growth of the overall market, like I said, my instinct is that it's growing just based on the popularity of sports and healthy lifestyles. But we wonder a little bit about the growth of AstroTurf. What's the overall size? Even if there are great margins and there's a lot of growth, if it's a pretty small market and Playworks is a big firm, may not actually be worth the investment. What's the competitive landscape look like? How many firms are there? Is it a concentrated industry, or is it more fragmented? So those we'd want to think about that in terms of whether or not we can actually get traction by entering. Looking at Playworks ourselves, or our client rather, we'd want to look at their product mix. It seems like this is going to dovetail pretty nicely, so I'm not super concerned about that. Capabilities, if we have a lot of rubber services or hardwoods, what's it going to take for us to actually be able to enter something like AstroTurf, which seems like it might actually require some different manufacturing capabilities. How does this work with our brand? Again, it seems like AstroTurf would fit nicely in, but I would want to look at brand identity and then customers. If we're moving into the AstroTurf market, does that mean we need to build out an entirely new customer base, which building a sales team around that could be costly, or is it going to work really well with our current sales position? So we want to look a little bit into our customer base, and then on the financing side, just what is the cost of this, and then what capital do we have available, or what capital does Playworks have available? Would it have to be debt finance? Is there cash on hand? Is it equity finance? And then I'd want to actually go into on the kind of economics of it, a break-even analysis of how long is it going to take us based on our projections, and answering a lot of the above questions I mentioned to actually break even on this investment. And then finally, part of that math comes to this how do we want to go about this. Obviously there are players out there that are in this space, so we could go about an M&A transaction to actually bring it in-house. We could consider going organically if we feel like we have the capabilities to do that, and we could also look into some kind of joint venture. So overall, those are the big questions that I think we'd want to answer. I guess I have an instinct for where I might go first, but if you have any thoughts on that analysis, would be curious to hear.
You're very thorough, and I think what we are interested in is first attacking the size, which you mentioned there. So I think, unfortunately, we don't have that information, but fortunately, we would love to know how you would go about market sizing the AstroTurf market in the U.S.
All right, so you're looking at just coming to like an estimate for the size of the AstroTurf market? Oh, great.
Exactly.
All right. So I guess in that case, do you mind if I take a couple seconds to just think through how I might structure going about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Great. So I have a structure here. Would want to walk you through a little bit of just how I would actually attack this. So the way I'm thinking about this is, we're looking at the U.S. market, and I guess I would kind of thought back to the context in which I've seen AstroTurf. And so one of those is schools. I think you mentioned schools as already a client of Playworks. Yes. And I think, not really thinking that there are many at like middle and lower schools or elementary schools, but I know high schools definitely, some use AstroTurf. Colleges certainly have AstroTurf. So basically as sports get more competitive and people get older, I think you're going to see a kind of a higher level of adoption for AstroTurf. So I have one category as high schools, one is colleges, one is pro sports where, certainly pro football fields have it. And then I think there are other, potentially a small contingent of parks or maybe other uses that is quite small. Yeah. So the way that I was thinking about going about this is that for each of those categories, we want to figure out basically how much is sold, and then just add that up across the 4 categories. So I'd want to do a quick basically estimation of how many actual total units are in just terms of high schools, colleges, et cetera, across the U.S. What is the adoption rate? So of the number of high schools, how many actually would have an AstroTurf field? Yeah. The average size of that field, we want to multiply that by, because my instinct is that they likely priced this by something like maybe square foot, and then we'd want to think about the replacement rate. So I can kind of just walk through that pretty quickly. There's quite a bit of calculation to do. So if you don't mind, I'll use some somewhat rough estimates that I'll hopefully back up with as much justification as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for the high schools in the U.S., I guess. My instinct is that we'd be looking at, as actually a middle school teacher, so another kind of as you get older grades, there are fewer of the schools. So let's say on average that there are maybe 500 high schools per state. Okay. So you'd be looking at 500 high schools per state times 50 states across the country. So we're looking at 250. So that's 25,000. Colleges, I think there's going to be a lot fewer. I would say maybe like 100 colleges on average. I know there are a lot of kind of smaller colleges out there. So we'll say like 100 colleges per state times 50 states is going to be 5,000 colleges across the U.S. Pro sports teams, there are going to be fewer still. I think, say on average, when you include kind of soccer, basketball, hockey, and all those things, you'd be looking at maybe 5 per state. So we'll say 5 times 50. So you're looking at 250 sports teams. And then thinking about kind of other facilities that might, like parks and things that might qualify. I think we're going to have low adoption of and I'll put this into the adoption rate of AstroTurf, but let's say there are, maybe about 100, kind of similar to colleges, that might actually use it. So 100 times, again, 50 states, so we're looking at 5,000 kind of other facilities, and I'm kind of thinking public parks are probably the best example of that. All right, so we have the number in each of those categories. Then we want to think about the adoption rate for those. High schools, I think most of these high schools are going to be public high schools where they might not be able to afford AstroTurf. My sense is that upkeep and things like that are pretty expensive. So I'm going to say adoption rate for those schools is actually, I can't, even in playing soccer and things, I can't remember. I don't think I actually even played once on an AstroTurf field, but I do know they exist. I have some friends that have played lacrosse on AstroTurf in high school. So I'm going to say about 1% adoption for high schools, so pretty small at high schools, which is going to give us 250 high schools across the U.S. that are using it. For colleges, I think it's going to actually be pretty high. Would actually have a field. So I would say probably like I'd say about 80%. So we'll say 80% of colleges have some kind of AstroTurf field, which is going to give us 4,000 units. Then on pro sports, I would say these are the number of teams, and so I would say probably about half of them have an AstroTurf. Because I think I'd say about 50%. obviously like a hockey team would not, but I think football teams, for example, sometimes have 2 fields even.
Yeah.
So I think about 50% would be a good estimate for that. So you're looking at about 125. And then for these parks, I would actually use probably about 10% of like 10% of those. Like I said, I don't think that's a very high adoption rate, which gives us 500.
Great.
So this is the size of the kind of the number of consumers across those markets. And then we'd want to actually figure out the size of consumers, the size of the fields. So I want to do kind of just a quick, I really think that, so for the high school and college, I think those are going to be pretty similar. And I actually think we could probably use a similar metric for parks as well. The pro sports fields tend to be a lot bigger, I think. So I think we'd want to use the same size for those 3 categories. So just to do some kind of rough math, I'm going to do it over here to stay organized. We'd be looking at an overall, let me think. So football, I think we can kind of use a football field as an estimate. They're about 100 yards in length, and I think like roughly 50 yards wide, but I know there's some space on either end. So I think we could say really about 200 in total length when you include end zones and space on the other side by 100. So we're looking at about 20,000 square feet. And in square foot's not a lot of space. So to be honest, I can imagine that actually being about $1 a square foot when it comes down to it. So we're looking at average size of 20,000 square feet for college, and let's say $1. I think pro sports may want higher end stuff, so I would actually maybe estimate their price at about double that. So let's say $2 per square foot for them, and I'm actually going to say their fields are twice as big also. I'm going to adjust that. I'd say 50% larger. Like I said, because they have media crews and things that need to be on those, so we'll say 30,000 square feet overall for those, and then like I said, 20K here. So we're looking at about, let's see here, we're looking at 20,000 times $1 is going to be $20,000 per field, times high schools is going to be, give me 1 second on this math. So this is $20,000, and then we're going to multiply that by 250, so we're going to have 500. So we have 5 million as the high school market, and we will have to calculate in a replacement rate for this. And then college is going to be pretty big, clearly. So we're going to do 2 times 4 is going to be 8, and then 3 plus. So then we have 80 million for the overall size of the college market. And then for pro sports, we have 30,000 per times 100. Oh, excuse me. It's actually going to be 60,000 per field because we're multiplying by $2 per square foot. And then I'm going to multiply that by 125. I know that 6 times 100 is 600. 6 times 25 is going to be 150. So we have 750. So that's going to be 7.5 million. And then finally for our parks, again, we're at 20,000 per unit times 5. So 2 times 5 is going to be 10. 10 million for parks. Great. So this is the overall amount that they were, if they were to all buy in 1 year, we add those up. But I'm thinking, it doesn't have to get replaced that often. I'm going to guess about a 10% replacement rate. So I'm going to quickly do that math. So we're at 0.5 million each year in the high school market. We're at 40 million each year in the college market. We're at 3.75 million in the pro sports market, and we're at 5 million in other. So I'm just going to add those up to give you the.
Did you get? You said 10%, correct?
Oh, excuse me. I ended up doing half. You're right. So this is going to be. Good catch. So it's actually going to be a bit smaller. So about 8 million there, 0.75 million there, and then 1 million there. So we're actually at, that's going to be 9. This is going to be 10.25 million as the overall annual market size for AstroTurf.
Awesome.
So I think this structure was a good structure to use for coming to a best guess. My instinct on 10.25 million is that seems pretty low, just given what I know about the ubiquity of AstroTurf.
Yeah.
So I think there are probably a couple things that I might change. Maybe replacement rates a little bit more often, or there are actually a lot more high schools adopting it. That 1% might be a little bit low. But right now I'm looking at about 10.25 million per year.
If you had to pick one assumption that you made that you think maybe you'd want to double check, which one would you pick?
I think I'd want to look at, as I just referenced, I think the adoption rate for the different, it seemed like these categories were close to exhaustive, but I think the adoption rate, especially on the high schools, that'd probably be the biggest metric, because I think there could be both a lot of more high schools than I estimated, as well as their adoption rate, even if because of there are so many of them, even if you up that by, say, from like 1 to 4%, that'd be a huge difference in the market.
Yeah, and I think so I think you're right. So we have actually done the calculations. After seeing this, Playworks has decided to move forward with entering the AstroTurf industry.
Okay.
So our research has shown that the market is actually $63 million annually.
Okay.
And so we have some more additional details to show you. So I'll give you this and give you a moment to look at it. And let me know what you see after you take a moment.
Sure. So it looks here, it looks like here we're looking at the overall market for AstroTurf in the US. And yeah, this is, I think, a little bit, this is positive, I think, because it's in line with how I segmented it. So we have like the high schools and colleges and professional, and that seems like really the overall, to make up pretty much the entirety of the market. And we have the overall revenue, so kind of how those contribute to that 63 million annually. And it looks like we have the materials costs, which seem to vary a little bit by segment. So I'm seeing different margins here. So that implies to me that, I think, as I surmised, maybe the quality of the materials are used might be different for college, professional, and high school. The pricing is actually a little bit different. And then we have the growth over the last few years. So I think, given what I'm looking at, it seems like we could maybe make some estimates so it sounds like, yes, they've decided to enter. Yes. So this actually, for me, makes me think that this is going to be helpful information to actually think about where we might enter. Exactly. So just to give you a little bit of context, I guess, on how I would approach that.
Okay.
So we decided, yes, we want to enter. And so then I think it's a question of, where do we enter? So I think some of the considerations I would be thinking about is, where are we going to have the highest margin? So profitability. We'd want to look at this overall size, and I think we have a little bit of information here on the size of potential market. And then I think we'd also want to look at the growth. Not only the overall relative size, but also what's going to be growing. And then I think finally considering ease of adoption. So if we do have sales channels in these this particular segment, that would be a lot easier for us to be able to actually enter. So ease of sales. So I'm going to be looking, I guess, do you think it makes sense for me to go ahead and identify which maybe one or two of these markets that might be a good place to start?
Yeah, so I think you listed a lot of great things. So I want to know, based off of these components, which I think are the key issues to think about, what do you have here that could help you answer some of those? Yeah,
I think we should be able to get pretty close. So we see some different growth rates. Looks like, for example, professional soccer seems, would be not something that we would have easy access to, because it seems like we work more with like schools and park systems, so they do have good growth. They're pretty small, so probably not there. So I'm looking up here where we have some of the bigger segments. That seems to me maybe like a good place to start. It looks like actually for both the high school categories, however, they have quite small margins, something like well less than 10% actually in both soccer and football, and also have a slightly lower growth rates. Looking down at college football, which is actually the second largest market, it looks like we actually have a pretty strong margin. We're looking at actually about 20%. And it's also the second highest growth rate. So college football, to me, kind of seems like it would be one of the stronger ones. So I'm just want to kind of compare it for growth. That was one of my criteria.
Yeah.
It's the second highest, so that seems good. It's also the second highest in terms of overall revenue for the full category. So that seems strong. I also said it actually looks like it may be the highest in profitability. Based on just some rough estimations, it looks like it's close to the highest in profitability. And then ease of sales. You did say schools. It's a little bit unclear. I guess, do you have a sense of, is the schools kind of for Playworks current sales? Does that encompass colleges as well?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, schools.
Right. Oh, great. Yeah. So, my instinct, just based on what I'm seeing here, and then also that ease of being able to actually kind of integrate this into our sales channels, that college football would actually be the best place to focus our energy for Playworks, at least in terms of the initial introduction to the field.
Great. Yeah. So that is where they have decided to go for those exact reasons. So in order to do the required research and development to bring AstroTurf to market, Playworks will need to invest $2.2 million upfront.
Okay.
So we know if the variable cost per square foot for AstroTurf is $1.10, we want to know how many fields will they need to sell in order to break even.
All right, so $1.10 in variable costs. Okay, so the nice thing here is that we actually, I think, yeah, you gave us, can I use this? This is the price that they charge?
Yes.
Great. So we have for college football, the price per square foot. So price per square foot is going to be $150, which is great. That gives us our contribution margin. So if we take our price, $150, less $1.10, that's going to give us, so they have a profit of 40 cents per square foot. And then, and so you said we're looking for just the number of fields they need to sell to break even?
Yep.
All right. Fields. So number of fields to break even. We have the amount they make on each square foot, and we have the fixed costs that they have to overcome, the 2.2 million. Do you have a sense of how big? So I have some estimations about how big the fields are.
Yeah.
Do you have is there any kind of data on what the average size for a college football field might be?
Yeah, you're almost there. So it's 100 yards by 140 yards.
All right, so 100 yards, I assume wide, so we have 100 by 140. And you said yards, right?
Yes.
All right, so that's important math.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to take, so 100 yards is going to be actually 300 feet.
Yeah.
So I actually think I made a small mistake earlier, and I think I was using feet rather than yards as my benchmark. So that actually could have been one of the other levers, because football fields are actually 100 yards rather than 100 feet.
Yeah.
So this much smaller size of a field actually might have been one of the other reasons that the market size was a bit smaller. So we have 300 feet this way, and then it's going to be 300 feet plus 120 feet, so 420. So the size of a field is 420 by 300 feet. So then I'd want to multiply those two numbers. So I'm going to do 42 times 3 is going to be 126, I believe. 126, and then 2, 3. So 126,000 square feet. Square feet, and on each of those square feet, so these are pretty big, the volume of actual square footage is pretty big, which I think actually makes sense now that we have this pretty small margin of 40 cents per square foot, but when you're selling that kind of volume, you can actually make a good profit. So we want to do 40 cents on the dollar, so 40 cents on the 100,000 would be 40,000. And then 40 cents on 26,000 is going to be 40 cents on 10 is 8 plus 8. And then 40 cents on the 6 is going to be 2,400. So we're looking here at $48,000, $50,400 per field would be the profit. And so that's their profit per field, and we're shooting now for the number of fields they need to break even. That's correct?
Correct.
Great. You feel comfortable I kind of estimate this, round this down to just 50,000 as the profit per field?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. So I'm going to move that to 50,000 per field, which is a pretty easy number to work with, which means that every 20 fields they sell, they have $1 million in profit. So 20 fields equals 1 million in profit, and we're going for 2.2 million. So 40 fields, so 20 more fields would be 2 million. And then to get to 200,000, we would need 4 more fields. So we're looking at 44 fields would be the break-even point, given the profit.
Go over the math one more time.
Yep. So they're making 50,000 per field.
Yes.
50,000 times 20 fields would give us $1 million. Correct?
Yep.
And then, so that would be the first million. Another 20 fields would be the second million. So that's 2 million in profit.
Got it.
And then the 2.2 million, that's the 0.2 million represents 200,000. 200,000 divided by 50,000 would give us another 4 fields.
Got it. Okay, correct. Great.
So I'm looking at 44 fields would be the break-even point.
Great.
And then I think the natural question then is, what's a reasonable? They've already decided, it sounds like, to enter the market. But what's a reasonable aspiration in terms of how quickly they'd be able to do that? And to understand that, I'd want to understand a bit about the industry dynamics. Is there one entrenched player? Is it a more is a more fragmented market where we might be able to actually enter and take up market share more quickly? So those would be definitely interesting questions to answer, to kind of look into how quickly this actually is feasible.
Yeah, well, great. Yeah, that's a good question, I think. So we're at a place where, so Playworks has a 3-year break-even timeline. And so we want to know, given that break-even timeline, does this sound like a reasonable goal? I think at this stage, we would just love for you to, with that in consideration, come up with a recommendation for our client.
Okay, great. Do you mind if I take a couple seconds to just sketch that out?
No, go ahead.
Sure. Great. So my recommendation is that, yes, as we've talked about, they should go ahead and enter the AstroTurf market, which is just as I initially hypothesized. Within that market, my recommendation is that they actually focus their initial entry into the college football market, as we talked about before. The reason we should enter in the first place is that overall the market is $63 million per year. I'm curious about the growth rate on that. Hopefully it's continuing to grow. And the reason we're focusing on the college football market in particular is that because we already have existing sales channels with colleges, it is one of the more profitable from a margin perspective markets within the AstroTurf business, and it's also positioned to grow at 4% per. It's been growing 4% per year, and also represents one of the bigger slices of the overall AstroTurf market. With respect to your question about the break-even timeline of 3 years, we're really looking at about a little less than 15, given the break-even point of 2.2 million. We're looking at about 15 fields per year. I think that my instinct is that does feel manageable, and so I think they're going to be in a position to be able to actually overcome that. I think some risks here are we don't know at this point a whole lot about the actual landscape. I think it could be that there are just a couple of very big entrenched players that are going to make it very difficult for us to actually get in and make inroads as quickly as we want, particularly in like something like the college market, which may be pretty locked up by some big contracts, maybe through the NCAA or something. In terms of next steps, I think we'd want to look at one, kind of internally, what are our capabilities for being able to actually develop this, and if we don't have those capabilities, what's the best alternative entry point, maybe M&A or a joint venture, as well as we really want to be able to kind of get our hands dirty in terms of understanding the landscape and what the best way to actually access those colleges to actually get, start putting our product on the fields.
Great, thank you so much, appreciate it.
Thanks.